mantra. My things are messy, I'm not sure. Don't close your eyes and let it catch up.
The Black Lives Matter movement. But before we talk about the Black Lives Matter movement in its entirety, we need to talk about the historical context of systems of oppression and systemic racism. Systems of oppression and systemic racism instilled certain beliefs into society against a certain societal group. An example of systemic racism is slavery. In slavery, Black and white Americans were held to a different standard, where white Americans were held to a higher standard than Black Americans. Even though slavery does not necessarily exist today explicitly, this type of thinking carried on into the present. Many institutions, like the government and other businesses, continue to enable systemic racism and systems of oppression by not acknowledging their past. And because of this, America cannot progress from their history with systemic racism and systems of oppression. Police brutality. Police brutality is definitely an issue extremely relevant today. There is a link between the Black Lives Matter movement and police brutality, where police are exerting violence and abusing their power over Black Americans. This is because of their qualified immunity, or their so-called license to kill. And police are protected by union contracts and have relationships with district attorneys, which allow them to sort of get away with abusing their power. Black Americans are 1.3 times more likely to be unarmed compared to white people, and yet they are 3 times more likely to be killed by police. Many people claim that police brutality only occurs in areas where violent crime rates are high, which is untrue. An example is in Buffalo, New York, where the violent crime rate is 12 to 1,000 and 0 people were killed by Buffalo police from 2013 to 2016, where the population was 258,959. In Orlando, Florida, the violent crime rate was 9 to 1,000 and 13 people were killed by Orlando police from 2013 to 2016, with a population of 255,483. There's no correlation and there's no accountability. 99% of the killings by police do not result in criminal charges. Mass incarceration. Many believe that mass incarceration arose from the 13th Amendment. Slavery was no longer allowed explicitly, and so the economy was dropping. And this loophole opened up an opportunity for the United States to rebuild its dwindling economy. Black Americans were incarcerated for many non-serious crimes like loitering. These types of petty crimes had very long sentences. This started the influx of mass incarceration in America. Mass incarceration also ties into the war on drugs by Nixon, where he criminalized drugs that were associated with Black Americans and hippies. And because they criminalized these drugs, they were inadvertently criminalizing Black Americans and hippies.
His campaign strategist, Lee Atwater, was caught on tape explaining the Southern strategy.
In other words, you start out, and now y'all aren't quoting me on this. All right, I won't hear it. You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts your backfire. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than white.
Instead of just seeing these drugs as illegal, they started seeing Black Americans and hippies as illegal, which led to another influx in mass incarceration. So mandatory minimums, which took away discretion from judges, militarization of the police, like SWAT teams, and the 3 strikes law, fed into the state of mass incarceration today. The spark of the Black Lives Matter movement began with Trayvon Martin, who was shot by George Zimmerman.
This guy looks like he's up to no good, or he's on drugs or something. It's raining and he's just walking around looking about.
Okay, and this guy, is he white, black, or Hispanic?
He looks black.
He's told not to approach the person in question.
Are you following him?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't need you to do that.
Zimmerman ignored the instructions and started following 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. Moments later, neighbors reported hearing gunfire.
There's gunshots.
You just heard gunshots?
Yes.
How many?
This one.
Zimmerman called the police due to suspicion of Trayvon Martin, even though Trayvon Martin was unarmed. Zimmerman was able to claim self-defense in court. It took 44 days to Zimmerman to be arrested only due to widespread petitions. He was eventually found not guilty of all charges. Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi took to social media where they started the hashtag Black Lives Matter in March 2013, which was a call to action. Due to these women's involvement for the Black Lives Matter movement, dozens of organizations and millions of individuals pressed for change, which became the backbone of the Black Lives Matter movement, pressing for change for the Black community. Other cases such as Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd influenced the Black Lives Matter movement to be what it is today.
Breonna Taylor.
A woman was shot and killed in her apartment.
George Floyd died in police custody after an officer pressed his knee into Floyd's neck.
He said, "I can't breathe," eerily similar to what we heard in 2014 with Eric Garner.
Black Lives Matter.
I filed an amended complaint that charges former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin with murder in the second degree.
George Floyd, whose killing by US police triggered anti-racism protests right around the world.
Weeks of global protests and international support
and impact around the world.
Protesters marched once again in cities worldwide demanding police departments change their tactics.
George Floyd! George Floyd! George Floyd!
Today, the Black Lives Matter movement is sometimes known as the largest movement in US history. From June 8th to the 14th of 2020, there was 26 million protesters, and in more than 550 places across the US, there were protests, peaking on June 6th. The Black Lives Matter movement, it gained a lot of traction due to the situation regarding George Floyd. None of the officers were arrested. People broke out over social media and signed petitions, started hashtags, started websites, started speaking out over the outrage regarding his unjustified death. There was an influx in social media usage for the Black Lives Matter movement, and the hashtag Blackout Tuesday was also used to bring awareness. Websites such as blacklivesmatter.car.co was also used to spread awareness about the Black Lives Matter movement and is now in a lot of people's social media bios. The hashtag All Lives Matter started to appear right alongside the hashtag Black Lives Matter. And these other hashtags are used against the Black Lives Matter movement.
Black Lives Matter isn't special because white lives matter as well.
A lot of people paint the Black Lives Matter movement out to be discriminatory, such as Trump, where he labeled the Black Lives Matter movement as discriminatory and bad for Black people and bad for everybody. Also labeled it as a Marxist organization, which makes people think that the Black Lives Matter movement is not good and it's bad and people should not be supporting it. A lot of people see the protests as violent, which sometimes can be true because there have been instances of looting, but those are deviants of the Black Lives Matter movement who would take advantage of the movement to commit violent actions, to paint the Black Lives Matter movement out to be bad. Truly though, the Black Lives Matter movement is made for good. When people use the All Lives Matter phrase, it's hurtful. All Lives Matter in a way downplays the efforts of the Black Lives Matter movement. All Lives Matter can't matter into Black Lives Matter, which is another thing I learned from a poll I did on social media. And in this poll, I asked, which one do you support, Black Lives Matter or All Lives Matter? 3 votes for All Lives Matter and 37 votes for Black Lives Matter, which initially surprised me because I thought that a lot of the people I know support Black Lives Matter. In addition to this poll, I asked why. A lot of people said that All Lives Matter can't matter until Black Lives Matter, which I think is extremely true. Some people said All Lives Matter not because they think that Black lives already matter, but they say All Lives Matter because they want to include the LGBTQ community. Overall, I learned a lot from the social media posts I did, and I learned a lot from social media in general regarding the topic, as well as outside research and movies and documentaries and news articles and staying updated in politics. I continue to support Black lives because right now they need our support. Whether you support All Lives Matter or Black Lives Matter, I think it's important to care for each other.